Welcome to the Shamanic Author Podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Worm. Are you a coach, holistic, or spiritual entrepreneur struggling to write your first book? The Shamanic Author Podcast will help you release that resistance inside yourself so you can access that state of being that writing requires. See, society has it all wrong. From a young age, we're told that we have to have the house, the degree, the fancy car to be happy. But the truth is, we have to become that state of happiness, and then the material success follows. We are human beings, not human havings, right? So I'm so excited for this episode today. Let's explore energy, alternative health, first-time author challenges, and book publishing marketing strategies. If this sounds like you, I want you to head over to mountainmindtricks.com/ultimate-guide for a free Ultimate Aspiring Author Guide. There's 3 steps in there that'll teach you exactly how to write a book that makes a big difference in your spiritual business, in your holistic or coaching practice. And if you want to know when the next episode is live, get updates, and learn more about the shamanic writing process, follow me on Instagram at mountain_mind_tricks. That's Mountain Mind Tricks with underscores. Follow the podcast and subscribe to the show to make sure you get the notifications when I release new episodes. Welcome to an amazing show today. I'm so excited. We have Chris Earnshaw. He's a professor, lecturer, philosopher, Freemason, and we go deep into how Freemasonry and Taoism could be the same thing, that Freemasonry could have came from the East, which is so interesting. And we go deep into exorcisms, using pendulums, into angelic beings, past lives. We kind of just go deep into the spirit realm, and Chris is such an amazing storyteller. You're in for a treat today for the podcast, and I'm excited, so here we go. Welcome, everybody, to the Shamanic Author Podcast. I'm so excited for my guest today, Chris Earnshaw. He's a 33-degree Freemason and lecturer, philosophy and politics at a university in Japan, and multiple author, amazing person that talks about Freemason, Taoism, dowsing, tarot. I'm just so excited for this conversation. And Chris, could you introduce yourself and let us know how you got into writing? Like, what was that journey like for you? How did that start?
Yes, so I've always been an avid reader since a young age. I went to boarding school in England, and we don't have television, so there's not much to entertain yourself with in the evenings. And so I started reading, and I'm not quite sure. I think the first book I read was The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, and I was probably aged about 8. I'm not quite sure where the second book came from, but I used to choose the books. They were mainly Penguin books, which are paperback books, and I choose the next book by reading what was in the back of the book, So I didn't really have a plan of what to read. So I was reading mainly Russian classics. I'm not quite sure why, but I wasn't really interested in Russia, but the stories were very big scale, Dostoevsky, Lermontov, Pushkin, people like that. And just kept on reading. Yeah.
Oh, I
And
love that.
so
Yeah.
I think when I got to a later age, probably about 16, then I started feeling that I wanted to write things. I was writing short stories, wasn't showing them to anybody, but and then my first book was actually an academic book. Ah, yes, the first book was about Japanese calligraphy, and I completed that when I was about 28. Yes.
Oh, that's so amazing. I love that. And so I'm also curious on how did you end up in Japan? Like, what was
Yes.
that journey like? And you're
Right.
from Britain, right?
Correct. From London. Yes. The English education system is a specialist system, meaning that every year you choose out of the classes you took, you choose your strongest classes to take the next year. So when you're about, I suppose, 11, you're probably studying 10 subjects. When you go to junior school, I suppose middle school, you study about 6 subjects. And when you go to high school, you only study 3 subjects, so it gets less. And when you go to university, of course, you only study one, sometimes a double, so two subjects. Whereas the American system is that you study probably about 10 subjects all the way through to university, which is very strange for me.
Yeah,
But
that's so different from our system. Yeah, that's really
yeah,
interesting.
so in England, it's a specialist system. But the problem about it is that you tend to choose the subjects that you got higher marks in, not necessarily the ones you're interested in. So you may be interested in art or want to be a doctor. Like in my case, I was very interested in medicine, but my grades were highest in languages. At high school, I did English, French, the history of art, and economics. That will not get you into medical school.
Right.
But that's the way the dice rolled. And I really didn't think much about, my future when I was like 11. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So the choices I made at 11 probably weren't the best choices to become a doctor anyway. Um, at university, um, they have exotic languages. So those are languages that are not taught at high school. So it includes things like Arabic, Chinese, Russian, and of course Japanese. And at the time in England, I'm talking of the late 70s, there was um, a movement which we called Japan bashing. The economy under Thatcher was all over the place, and there was a lot of kind of discrimination against Japanese imported cars. People believed that Japan was dumping their cars into the Japanese economy. And by dumping, they mean they were selling them at a lower price than they were being sold in the Japanese market. Well, I didn't know much about the situation. I mean, of course, I was studying economics, but I didn't know the validity of the argument. So I thought there was an opportunity to study Japanese at university, which would put me into a place to understand both sides of the argument. And so I applied to Cambridge with my 4 A levels, and I applied to Cambridge to do Japanese. I met with Professor Carmen Blacker, I think her name is Black, and I realized that Japanese is going to be quite a challenge. So I took a gap year, which is the suggested way, preferred way of doing university in England, because 18-year-old kids are seen to be a bit immature to go to university, and they suggest they take 1 year off to think about it before you actually apply to go to university. Particularly in those days, university was free, and they didn't want students wasting the university's time applying for a course, halfway through dropping out, which meant that some other student couldn't get in, who may have succeeded or done very well. You were just slowing the system down. So they really wanted. So my gap year, I came to Japan, and I studied Japanese here, and I thought, why study Japanese in England when you can study it in Japan, And so I didn't go back. I didn't go to Cambridge. I eventually went to London University, SOAS, which is the School of Oriental and African Studies.
Oh, that's so amazing. I love that. And what a
I stu-
journey.
I stumbled into it. So
Yeah.
no planning, just what I think many people are rather like that, in life. I've met many people, and they never planned many things in their lives, unless they came from a family where the father was a doctor, and then the son's going to be a doctor. Um, in Japanese, we say that the baby snake follows the father snake, So, and
Right.
that's the way but other people just seem to take what comes to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so tell me more about Freemasonry, because I know that's a major subject you write about. It's a part of your life. And I
Yeah.
guess to start off, I think we all have an idea of what Freemasonry is, probably from National Treasure or like American movies like that, where it's like,
Right.
we have the conspiracy ideas, but what is Freemasonry? Like what is that, and how do you come across that?
I didn't get involved in Freemasonry until I was in my late 30s. And I, my parents and my grandparents had been Masons, and also I think believe my my grandparents, the one before that, the Japanese Hioji-san, anyway, great grandparent, he was, I believe, in the Grand Lodge of England. And so um, there's a history of it, but we don't really talk about Freemasonry at home, what it is, and we don't go into sort of deep, and particularly as I was at boarding school most of the time. So when I came to Japan, I was a member of the Kobe Club. I was living in Kobe, and in the car park at the back of Kobe, there was a Masonic lodge. And it got me thinking. And then I started asking around, and I found that there was a Mason in my company. I was working in a pharmaceutical company without a medical background, which or scientific background, but that's how it goes in Japan, in England. And I asked around, and then he introduced me to the lodge. So I didn't really know much about it when I joined, and I think that's most people are like that. They're intrigued by Freemasonry. Um, of course, in the early days, there wasn't very much on the internet. It wasn't as hasn't expanded as much as it has now, and so the data on the internet was quite limited. Um, but basically, it's a system of morality. It's what is sold as a system of morality to make good men better. But it's actually much, much deeper than that. And that's what I write about in my books. I write about what I call spiritual Freemasonry. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and so you were explaining earlier off air about how there's kind of this Taoism that kind of bleeds over into the Freemasonry, right? And that's something you write about in a lot of
yes,
your books. And then
yes,
that's what you're talking about, the spiritual Freemasonry. Can you tell us more
yes.
about some of those ceremonies, or what did you see that was similar?
Right. So that's a good question. First of all, I've been a Mason more than 20 years. Uh, and I was just accepted the story that it is given. It's a three-step process. We call the 3 degrees. The first degree is the initiation, and it's we bringing a candidate from we say a state of darkness, what we call spiritual poverty, and then we educate him in the second degree about life and the work that improves a person's lives to do with learning about virtues and what we call the 3 tenets, which are brotherly love, relief, which means charity, and truth. And so these are the core beliefs of our system. And then in the third degree, the candidate goes through a kind of symbolic death and rebirth, and he then proves that he understands the teachings of the first 2 degrees, and then he's brought to like raised to a new life in our brotherhood, and it's all based around the story of rebuilding King Solomon's temple, which, as most listeners will know, it was destroyed twice. And our job is to build symbolically in our hearts a third King Solomon's temple, where we can meet with God. We don't define what God is. Which religion we don't we accept all religions, so God is whatever you want him to be, but we believe that people should be in a stronger communication with what we call the supreme architect of the universe, and in that way we become more spiritually attuned. Well, that's what I believed for the first 20 years. And then about in 2016, which is 4.5 years ago from where we are now, um, I visited Taiwan because at university I studied Japanese and Chinese at London University, and I was particularly interested in Chinese. Um, the Japanese have borrowed so many things from China, and so China seemed to be the origin. And I was particularly taken with the teaching of Mencius. Mencius is known as the second sage in China. He was a pupil of Confucius. Well, when I say pupil, he learnt about Confucianism from Confucius's grandson. So there's like 100-year gap between the two of them, and they never met. So, but the way Confucius wrote um, about life and how we should live it and virtue and things, it just seems so fresh to me. But Confucius died, I forget the exact date, but something like 180 BC. So we're talking like 2,500 years ago the guy died, but he was writing about things that were so fresh and vivid. And so when I heard that Taoism is based on the teachings of Confucius and Mencius, I wanted to learn more. A friend invited me to Taiwan, and I was initiated. If
Oh,
I can take
that's
a short story about Mencius,
ye-
may be of interest. When I was in a major pharmaceutical company, it's called the Wellcome Foundation. It now is part of GlaxoSmithKline, GSK. And because I spoke Japanese, they sent me to Japan. But the way they did it was very strange. This is a major company at that time. Wellcome had 70,000 employees, all around the world, and they had an HR department with something like 30 people in there, and inside that, 10 people were dedicated to the HR issues for people around the world because they had so many employees from Singapore to America, uh, Research Triangle Park, for example. So you'd have thought they would be professionals. But when I went to Japan, first of all, I had to buy my own ticket. So it was a bit strange. I thought they'd give me a ticket. So I bought my own ticket for me, my wife, and my children, and bought it. And I arrived in Osaka. I went to the office. I didn't know how to get there, so I just got in a taxi and went. Um, when I arrived, nobody was expecting me, and I was just standing there. So what am I going to do? Where am I going to stay? So I booked into a hotel and waited till somebody turned up and came to my hotel and said, "Oh, welcome to Japan." I said, like, what the hell, And Mencius talks about this in his book. And he gave exactly the same story. And when I read it, I could see myself in the story. And the story is that when a king sends an ambassador to another country, he has to do three things. The first thing is he has to take the ambassador to the border and say goodbye to him, which shows the ambassador that he is supported by the king. Secondly, before the ambassador arrives in the neighboring company, the king should send runners into the country telling everybody that the king is sending his best man. This man is our best ambassador, and you can expect some great things from this person. So the receiving company are all excited and looking forward to the person's arrival. The third thing you should do is while the ambassador is in working in the neighboring company, you should not steal his property and his servants and forfeit all his savings and things like that. Otherwise, he won't come back because he's got nothing to come back to. I saw myself in that story because nobody took me to the airport. Nobody prepared my going to Japan. When I arrived in Japan, nobody knew I was coming in the first place. So there was no reception. There wasn't even a desk for me to sit at. And third, there was no guarantee that I had a position to come back to in the office when I came back from Japan. So I just stayed in Japan for the rest of my life.
Wow, that's so interesting to show up and nobody's like,
Yeah.
what do you mean?"
Yeah, but
Yeah.
this was written about 2,500 years ago. If you want your ambassador to be successful, these are the three things you have to do. And none of them were done by this multinational organization. You'd have thought they knew better. Obviously, they haven't read Mencius.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so tell me more about how did you get into dowsing and um, you know, more deeper spiritual practices?
Yes. So while I was a Freemason, Freemasonry is a mixture of many things. It's part charity, of course. It's a major international charity. It gives away millions of dollars every day. Um, but it is also a like a theater, because you're enacting this play every time, and the play doesn't change. It's always the same play, but the main character is always a new person. And then it's part a debating society. It's part ritual, which is rather like being in a church or a chapel. For some people, it's rather like militaristic. And the last point is it's very spiritual. And because we have an altar, we pray to God, and we have lectures from the Bible, and we take prayers from the Bible. So when Freemasonry started in 1717, there was only Christianity in England. There was no other religions at all. So Freemasonry is based on Christianity. But we became more pluralistic, and we allowed other religions, starting first of all with Judaism and then Islam, and then other religions were accepted into Masonry. And so at the moment, from that point onward, we made kind of no ethnic or religious discrimination. At the time, Christianity, the Protestant England was fighting with Catholic countries all around it, Scotland and Ireland, which were Catholic, and of course, France and Spain. So, you know, at that time, for a Protestant country to allow Catholics to become members of Freemasonry, that was a very advanced thing to do. So I think I've forgotten what the question was. I tend to ramble a bit.
Yeah. So dowsing, how did you get into
Yes, right.
dowsing?
Yes. So spirituality, I started to realize it was a very spiritual thing. And I started reading about spiritual, because Freemasonry emphasizes immortality. And I didn't really think much about immortality. So I started reading about immortality. And a friend introduced me to Jane Roberts' books, the Seth books. And I have nearly the whole collection, I believe. And I found that very, very interesting as an introduction to spirituality. And I started practicing all sorts of things. I went in all sorts of directions. Started with Ouija boards, I was using crystals. And then I realized that I needed a way to communicate that I could visually see a result. Because with crystals, you don't actually see anything happening. It's a belief. You believe that the energy of the crystal is helping you making a change, either a spiritual or mental or some physical change. But with a pendulum, you can actually see a reaction. And if you learn advanced technique with dowsing, you're able to measure things like a degree of change, or the the energy that comes through the pendulum. For example, how fast it travels, or which direction it travels, and you're able to change that by talking to whatever's moving the pendulum. And that got me really excited from a kind of, at the time I was in pharmaceuticals and I was studying all the things I should have studied at high school. And so I was thinking, how does this get moving? The second thing I did was I had a kind of difficult childhood. My parents divorced while I was at boarding school, and I didn't really know what was going on, and they were hiding things from me. they were going to court all the time, and when I went home, there was only one of them. And where's my father? So it was a little bit difficult for me, and I was carrying this around in my body for 30 years. And a friend introduced me to a tarot reader, and when I went to the tarot reader, I was just skeptical, is the word I should use. But I was so blown away with what he told me about my family and the relationships. And I was thinking, how's this guy know this stuff? Where's it coming from? And eventually he said, "You're an orphan." "Yeah, I'm not an orphan." He said, "Yes, you feel like an orphan." And thinking about it, it's probably true. It's because the parents were always at home, they were working, and I was at school by myself. I probably was a form of an orphan. Anyway, so I started studying the tarot. And again, I didn't know where to start, but I bought some books and cards and I practiced. And then I ended up reading Edgar Casey. I mean, it's just a tangent. And I read a book about Edgar Casey called The Commentary on the Book of Revelation. And then I realized that the tarot cards are actually many of the tarot cards are based on the book of Revelation. And I thought that was pretty awesome. And you can see the tarot cards from 1 to 14 are in the book of Revelation. They're described nearly exactly the same, and they're in the same order. And I thought, wow, that's awesome. And I made this sort of discovery. So I wrote a book called The Tarot of the Revelation. And from then, I think having these two skills, the tarot card and the dowsing, I don't know if it blossoms the correct word. I think I just took off. I expanded. All sorts of things started happening. It was awesome. It was great. Yeah.
Oh, I love that so much. And gosh, the Seth books, Edgar Casey, like
Yeah.
for people not familiar, you got to check out that stuff. And the Seth books remind me that author kind of channeled Seth, right?
Yes.
And it's a very good read, very deep, a lot of wonderful value there, along with Edgar Casey. The Sleeping Prophet, I think a lot of
Yeah.
is kind of the name for him. And Edgar Casey just blows my mind with everything he predicted and everything he did in his life, still coming true to this day. So amazing. And so I guess I want to go a little bit deeper. I really want to talk more about your books, and we're going to get there.
Oh,
And
right.
I want to get a little bit deeper into something you were talking about off air, if you're willing to, about using the dowsing for exorcisms and
Yes.
helping people with that. And I would just love to hear more about how did that happen the first time? Like, how did you get into that the first time? And also some of the things that you've seen um, doing dowsing for helping people with demons or with negative
Right.
energies attached to them.
Right. Right. So I come from a background where we're not very religious. I was brought up in the Church of England, which is obviously Protestant, and I went to communion because at school it was a Christian school and it was required of us. And so as soon as I left school at 18, the last thing I wanted to do was to step into a chapel or a church again. I'd had enough. And so I didn't really understand about demonology and this whole world of spiritual entities. So I had to learn really quickly. And I read a book by a dowser. And this is another, I find when you're on the path, a lot of synchronicities or coincidences. I mean, talking Japanese so long, I forget my English. Um, they start to happen. And I feel that I'm being directed all the time. I'm getting directed. Um, so I was listening to a podcast while I was driving, and I'm trying to think what it was called. Not forbidden. He's quite a famous person. If
Is
I look
it
at the book, I'll
forbidden
remember.
knowledge? Forbidden knowledge, maybe?
I'm not sure. It's an American author who had UFO experiences, and he's quite famous. And I've got the book, but I just can't see where I put the book. If I see the title, it'll come back to me. Um, anyway, so I was listening to his podcast, and he introduced this person called Raymond Grace. Uh, and Raymond Grace was talking about his experiences as dowsing, and that changed my life, that podcast. And that's just one of those coincidences. I just happened to turn it on while it was being played. And he teaches about how to exercise using um, the pendulum. So great, I got the knowledge, but I didn't know anybody who needed an exorcism. It's not like people there's a place to go to find people who need it. But so I started kind of talking to the other side and using what skills I had. And then eventually I found people that had issues, and they never talked about this. For example, like they were hearing voices, or they couldn't sleep because they had nightmares all the time, or other things that let me think. Yes, they used to get headaches all the time, and so I tried working with them, and I was quite successful. I just first thing is that you have to make sure to understand that it's not you doing anything. You're using the pendulum like a telephone to talk to the other side, to ask on the other side to do the work. Okay, so that's the important thing. Otherwise, people think, "Oh, I'm a magician. I'm Merlin or something." You're not. You're just asking the side that has all the energy and all the power to do the work on your behalf, and that's an important thing to remember. And secondly, you should never be close to the person that's having an exorcism done, because that energy can come to you. It can stick in your aura, or actually even worse, get inside of you. And this is really difficult. So you always want to do it at a distance, like in different houses or even different cities. Um, then I read a book called Journeys um, by, oh man, I just forget. When you get old, you tend to forget people's names so quickly. Um, Oh dear. Journeys is written by the famous author who writes the Jurassic Park and things like that. Clayton. No, not Clayton. Something like that. Crichton. He wrote about his spiritual journeys, looking for meeting spiritual people. And one of the stories is about going to Los Angeles and having an out of body experience and seeing negative energy stuck inside his own aura, which was sucking his energy from him, and the negative energy just living on his like a parasite. Michael Crichton. Yeah. And yeah, so that's reading these sort of stories. They just enforced what I was doing. Um, then the story that we mentioned offline, um, it's uh, a 13-year-old junior high school girl had been kidnapped outside Tokyo. And I thought, well, hey, I'm a dowser. I should be able to find her. So I got a map. I dowsed what I thought. I had a picture, and I took a picture off the internet. I put my left hand on a photograph, and even a printing of a photograph still has enough energy in it for you to tune in with a. You don't have to have an original photograph. Just a print of a photograph will do. And so I was tuning into her. I knew roughly where I thought she was being held, but hey, what do? You just can't go and knock on the door and say you've kidnapped a young girl, or you can't go to the police. The police will think you're crazy. They won't even listen to you. So I felt, I felt very stymied. I thought, what the hell am I going to do? So then I realized I should ask a higher authority to do it. And so I asked my guide on the other side to call in an archangel to free the girl. and and as soon as I did that, the energy in the room changed. I just, it was like very thick, heavy energy, but it was sparkling. It was vibrant. It was like, I just don't know how to explain it. It was like being inside candy floss. No, not even that. It's not a good it's just very hard to describe it. The energy was, because I think that that angel had come to visit me. I didn't talk directly. I just talked to my spirit, and I tried not to get too excited. I said, "This is where I think the girl is. Uh, she's been kidnapped. Her parents are worried about her, etc." And then I asked, because this is what Raymond Grace says: you should always ask for a sign to make sure that the other side has heard your request. And the angel I was calling on, uh, I bought a book about angels. Yeah, and I got, because you have to research this stuff. You just can't play around. You've got to make sure you know what you're doing. So the angel I was talking to has a color, and the color is bright blue. So I asked for a sign, um, and I didn't specify blue. I just said, show me a sign that you've heard my request, and left it at that. And 3 days later, I was leaving the house, and from in front of my house, I have a small garden, and there's a gate that leads into the street. And on the gate was this dragonfly, bright blue dragonfly. It was iridescent, they call it. It was just sparkling. I mean, it was just so blue. I'd never seen a bright blue dragonfly like that. And it was sitting exactly where you put your hand on the gate to open it. So there's no way I would miss it. And it didn't move until I approached it. I went right up to it. And I think I recognized this as being a sign at that point. It just came to me. This is the sign. Then the dragonfly flew away. And I thought, wow, this is awesome. About 5 days later, the kidnapped girl walked into a police station and asked for help. It's just,
Wow. What an amazing story of
yeah,
really,
even now,
wow,
sorry,
yeah.
it chokes me up.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I can just feel the power behind that, like how much love
Yeah,
that took, right? To really help that person. Like,
yeah.
wow, I just
But
love your story.
that's happened about 7 years ago, and still it just moves me. It's just I think what it is the world we are in now is so focused on material things, like getting money to buy this, to get a bigger house, to get a shiny car. And we've totally missed that we're actually part of something bigger, which is the spiritual world. And we don't have an interaction with the spiritual world. We don't, the spiritual world is just very willing to help us. We talk about guardian angels. Well, the guardians, because they want to guard you, help you, protect you from doing stupid things. Um, but do we ever talk to our guardian angels? No, nobody does. And I think when we go to a church to pray, those prayers get filtered through our guardian angels, and then they go to other levels, and then they go, if you really need help, they know who to connect it to. Like I asked, I said, please send an archangel. I just could have said, please organize this, or please just, do it for me. But I actually specified who I wanted. But normally, I think the guardian angels, our spirit guides, are automatically funneling our requests and things like that when you pray. And one of the things is not just praying, but how to pray. We've completely lost how to pray. We're always demanding and wanting. We should be in a sense of gratitude is what we need when we pray. Thank you for all the wonderful things you've given me. You know, that's what you should be saying, not, oh, give me a new Mercedes. I need a new Mercedes like my next door neighbors. No, it's just imagine being on the other side. I want a Mercedes. So, it doesn't mean anything to the spiritual world. But when you're helping people and, you know, uh, fighting evil, which is the spiritual world's all about, then they'll move heaven and earth to help you, literally.
Yeah, it's so amazing. I love this, and so I want to go a little deeper into like your books, and
Yeah.
I want to ask you like, what was one of the books that I guess was there ever a book that you wrote that was a transformational process for you, a book that really helped you integrate lessons, a book that just the writing alone was like really took you somewhere internally?
Yes. So um, I think the spiritual books I've written, first was the Tarot of the Revelation. Um, I found that I was channeling information. I didn't feel that um, I started off with an idea, um, because Edgar Casey, he hadn't talked about tarot cards. He had just interpreted the Book of Revelation into kind of modern spiritual language. Um, and then when I read his interpretation, I could see the tarot cards. Um, but when I started writing, all these other ideas kept coming through to me. So it's like being there's this journey that when you focus on, I think it's Joseph Campbell said that when you focus on something, the universe constellates around you. It brings the information to you. And so writing about the tarot cards and the information in there. So it changed the tarot cards into more powerful tarot cards because now you're using spiritual lessons and to read the tarot cards. So therefore, your reading becomes much more about the spiritual growth of the person you're reading for. So then, when I was doing the like going to yeah, I haven't mentioned this. This is also interesting. When I went to Taiwan to be initiated, um, one of the first things I noticed was it's nearly the same as the first degree initiation in Freemasonry. Um, Freemasonry and Taoism are the only two organizations that initiate somebody with light. Everyone else uses water or fire normally, and Wiccan sometimes earth, but they never used light. And this is what makes the two organizations uh, unique. I don't call them religions because Freemasonry and Taoism, neither of them are religions. They're more to do with a way of life based on morality and virtue. And that's what Taoism teaches as well. They don't pray to God. They don't um, uh, have to be a little bit careful because there are two types of Taoism. There's a philosophical type of Taoism, uh, Tao Jia, which is the one I was studying, and then there's Tao Jiao, which is the religious type. And they're the ones with the very ornate temples with dragons on the roof, on the roof of the temple, and all these gods and things, and the pillars are bright red. I was studying the philosophical one, which was very muted. The rooms were very plain. Uh, but yes, so one thing that happened to me while I was there was that I had lots of questions, and one of the problems was I don't speak Chinese well enough to communicate to somebody about philosophy, or, so. Um, but they did have one Chinese member who was fluent in English, and he said, if you want to talk about Taoism, we have to light the candles. Well, that's the same as in Freemason. We have three candles. What you have to light the candles before you do anything in Freemasonry, and the last thing you do is you turn you snuff the candles out. So you need to have the candles on first, otherwise no spiritual work can happen. It's the same in Taoism, and so it's. I asked the person some questions about Tao. He said, "Come with me." So we went into the temple, and he lit these three candles. And I said, "This is like Freemason." Anyway, so I asked him a question, and suddenly I got hit by lightning. I thought it was lightning. It was really strange. I was standing by the altar, pointing at things, and light came from above. It came through the left side of my brain. It went down the left side, through my heart, through my left leg. And at that time, I had an out of body experience. My I split into three, I think it may be three or four people. And I could see the other two, so three of us, yes. So the physical me held onto the altar suddenly because bang, the light came through me, and I held onto the altar. The second one, rather like in the Matrix, Keanu Reeves, I bent backwards like this, leaning forward, and there's a third one watching the other two. And um, I wasn't hurt. It wasn't an electrical thing. It wasn't to do with electricity. It was light sent from above. I don't know how it happened. And I said to my guide, I said, "Did you see that?" And he said, "No." And I said, "I just got hit by lightning, I think." And I explained it to him. He was ecstatic because he says this sort of thing happens probably once or twice a year in this Taoist temple. Somebody has this illumination by light, and I felt, I had to tell the story like 12 times to everybody that kept coming, and all the senior Taoists. They don't call them priests. I'm not sure exactly what they call them. Forget what they call them in English. Guardians, I think, guardians of the light. Anyway, they kept coming to say, "What happened?" I said, "Well, this it just came." They were all so excited. So that was kind of a moving experience, yes. But this is the universe. I
Oh,
teach these. I used to teach these things to people. I used to teach people simple things like how to use the tarot cards and things. And I tell them, life is wonderful. It's full of wonder. We have all these wonders that are happening. Like being able to uh, leave your body and not die. It's an out of body experience. Or you can read people's stories, and then you can hear voices, and you can have all sorts of experience. These are wonders. We shouldn't think that there's, as the Catholic Church calls them, the works of the devil. They're not the works of the devil. We're being guided, we're being pushed forward to be better than ourselves. And that's why I say life is wonderful, full of wonders.
oh, I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that story because I've also had out of body experiences and they're just so powerful and life changing.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing I've been realizing about books in the last maybe 6 months to a year is I think when we're actually in that state of reading, we really get deep into that. Like you don't even know that you're reading. You're so immersed into the story or the
Mm.
paragraph. You're literally having an out of body experience through reading through the book in a way. And I just love it. It's so powerful.
Yeah.
This is why I'm so passionate about it because it changes people's lives. And like you've mentioned, like this book and this book and this book has literally changed my life. And
Yeah.
I feel the same. There's multiple books I can go back to. That was the turning point, was
Yeah.
reading that book.
Yeah.
And so
Definitely.
tell us more about what books you have written and where can we
Yeah.
find them and what's that
Okay.
like?
Fine. So I've written 4 books about the spiritual aspects of Freemasonry, and they're all on Amazon, and you can see on YouTube as well. I call them spiritual Freemasonry because it's what Freemasonry should have, what was originally about. And so there are 4 books in the series. The first one is Initiation by Light. Um, Freemasonry, Initiation by Light, and is exactly the story I just talked about. But I give all the detail about the Taoist ritual and the Freemasons ritual and how they're exactly the same. So who copied who? Well, obviously the Freemasons took it from Taoism, but how did that happen? Then I wrote another book about the quest for immortality, because Freemasonry is all about a quest for immortality. And then the second degree is called spiritual alchemy, because it is a form of alchemy. And so in China, they were practicing alchemy from about 500 BC, and they gave up practicing after about 300 years because they realized that there's no way that you can transmute lead into gold. It doesn't work. But then they realized that the real transformation is a spiritual transformation inside yourself. And then they started studying it. And then books were written, for example, like The Golden Flower, which is a story, no, sorry, story, like a textbook on how to have an out of body experience and how to create that energy inside yourself, so your your astral body can leave you, and and it just explains it. And then I realized it's exactly what the third degree of Freemasonry is, exactly the same process, but given as a play, not as a book. And then the fourth book goes into all the out of body, what the Freemasons in 1700 would have known about, for example, spiritual things. Well, they would have known about saints, and there's Teresa, Saint Teresa, and there's a male saint, Carmelo, I think his name, who actually floated in air. They just lifted up, and a couple of them lifted up in front of the bishop, who came to see this, and they had to pull the person down from the sky because he was just going to float off. And there are dozens of stories of people, who are actually able to fly in a way. They're just floating 6, 8 feet off the earth, and these have been attested to by many people. So how the hell does that happen? We don't see that happening nowadays. There'd be riots in the street. Um, the healing. Uh, Bruno Gröning. I don't know if you've heard of Bruno Gröning, but this sometime about beginning of the Second World War in Germany. He used to heal people by standing in front of them, talking to them, and perhaps 1,000 people would collect around his house, and they'd all go home healed. He just came out like Jesus, and he said, started talking to them about, I'm not sure what, and people who were in wheelchairs went home pushing the wheelchair. Uh, these things, we think of them as miracles, but there must be a way of recreating this so that the whole world can understand it. Anyway, I'm going beyond myself, but the Freemasons have this wonderful spiritual exercise. So at the beginning, I said, it's a 3-step process where a person comes from a state of darkness, of spiritual poverty. But it's, if you actually look into the ritual and study it very carefully, you'll see the hints inside the ritual that people. One of the issues is that the ritual of Freemasonry was written in 300 years ago, 1717, the Hanoverian period. And the language they use is slightly different from what we have now. And also our education is different. I went to private schools. So in England, I studied Latin. It was obligatory to study Latin or Greek. Luckily, my school was Latin. And so I had this kind of background of the classics. So when I started studying this ritual, I realized that it was much deeper than people with a modern education would understand. So these 4 books, did I say the Royal Arch? Yes, the fourth one, Royal Arch. So they basically take the ritual apart and show what the original 3 Grand Masters, Anthony Sayre, George Payne, and John de Sagulier, who rewrote Freemasonry over a period of 8 years, and then recreated the 3-degree system. I think that I believe my books give what they really wanted Freemasonry to become, which now it's actually a system of morality. But morality, that's a very Victorian term, and so in the Victorian age, Freemasonry changed somewhat to be focused on morality and being more somber, whereas in the earlier days it was people wore bright clothes, and they talked about philosophy and these occult practices that I'm talking about.
Oh, that's so awesome. Yeah. So for everybody listening, all the links, the books will be in the show notes, and you got to check these out because they're
Thank
so
you.
deep and wonderful. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, did you self-publish your books? Did you go through a publisher, and what was that journey like, and why did
Yes.
you publish that way?
So I published self-publishing through Amazon's POD, print on demand. I'd never done it before. I'm in love with it now. There are many reasons for it. The finished product is just so good. I mean, I always thought POD was, like pulp and cheap paper and stuff like that. No, it isn't. The quality of the paper is really good. You can't see the prints of one page from the other page. It doesn't show through, so the quality of the paper is really good. The covers are good. They've now started publishing in hardback as well. I hadn't done that yet, but present my books are all paperback. Um, the royalties are probably 5 times what I would get from a publisher. And but that means that I'm responsible for my own marketing. So I have to use Amazon's sales tool. Have to pay for advertising on Amazon, which is part of the package, I suppose. And I write a lot of articles about my books on the internet, both on Twitter, my webpage. I'm planning to do an audio book for people who like to listen to books while you drive. I haven't started yet because that's a big thing. What I'm currently doing is translating my 4 books into Japanese for the Japanese audience. And so the second thing I like about Amazon's print on demand is that you can make changes to the book and the books are changed within a day. So even though I had 2 professional editors, um, both were Freemasons, so they knew the terminology, and both were editors, they still missed lots of small things. It drove me crazy. But as soon as I found it, next day I corrected it, put out a new version. 2 days later, the new book's there with the corrections in it. Traditional publishing, it's impossible. And so there's things I don't like about Amazon. I don't like their ebook system very much. 10% of my sales are ebooks, but um, I understand ebooks people like to read on computers, but for an author, the formatting, the choice of fonts, how to put images in, it's just terrible system. It just drives me crazy. But anyway, but the published books come out really nice. Really nice.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you so much. And so, is there any last thoughts, anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to talk about, any questions I didn't ask you?
Well, if we can extend for another 3 hours, yes, there's lots of things. But um, so one of the things about I put, when I sign up for something and it says, what's your belief system, or are you religious? I always just put down spiritual. I'm a spiritual person. And it has allowed me to understand what religion's all about. And so the Bible, I have a better understanding of the Bible. In my books, so I have a lot of references. I think one of my books has 600. The book itself is 200 pages, but it has 600 references in it. Of that 600 references, 150 are from the Bible. So I'm quoting Freemasonry based on what is in the Bible. And that has given me a new appreciation of what the Bible's all about. Because the Bible wasn't written by God, it was written by people. And most of the Old Testament was written by prophets, people like me, spiritual people who have out of body experiences, or like Ezekiel had an out of body experience and his chariot went up into heaven. Well, actually, I think he's the one that went into heaven, not his chariot, but whatever. And so when you look at the Bible, you see it with different eyes now. I don't see it as a religious document. I see it as spiritually advanced people trying to explain their experiences to lay people. Um, for example, uh, Saul's experience on the road to Damascus, he had an out-of-body experience. It says that in the Bible, and he saw Jesus, because he was out of the body, had an OEB. But so there's all these. And the other thing, for example, Jesus, I think I forget the exact number, but he healed about 35 people. Of those 35 healings, 80 of them were exorcisms. People don't realize he was an exorcist. He said, go to there's one famous story about a person who had all these demons in it, and he said, demons, get out, and they all jumped into pigs, and then he sent the pigs over the cliff to kill themselves, which is a very strange way of doing an exorcism. You shouldn't do it like that, but that's how they had to explain, how to get rid of the demons. And he healed a person by telling, demons, get out of this person. But unfortunately, that man lost his livelihood. Those pigs were, what he lived on with those pigs, and he destroyed the person's livelihood. There's another way of doing it, which is, in my case, when and I check the level of anger or hatred that the demon has, and I ask the universe, my guide, to send this entity to a higher level for re-education. I believe that we should have sympathy and understanding even for negative entities. Call them whatever you want, demons, whatever you want. To me, it's just a negative entity. But we should have sympathy for that, because they are misunderstood. They were probably, in their own lives, they were probably abused or taken advantage of. They may have been enslaved. They may have had, and so they couldn't cross over. They had so much anger inside them that when they couldn't go into the light and go into the afterworld, they stayed stuck in our, energy field, I suppose. And then they found some poor person to attach to, So I always, make sure that these people, these entities are treated well and they are re-educated. I think that's an important point. But it also explains things like alcoholism. People who are alcoholic, they're driven to it many times because they have somebody who was an alcoholic in another life. He's sucking on the energy and he wants that buzz he gets from the alcohol, and he keeps pushing the person to go and have a drink. So the energy entity can live off that feeling of the alcohol going around. Suicides are the same. Many suicides, and I work with suicide prevention. I've got an NPO particularly for that. And these people, they often say that, I felt I was being pushed to it, that I had no option, So studying spirituality and our relationship with the other side is so important. It the whole world changes when you start to understand the big picture and forget about the Mercedes Benz and the pay rises and things like that. And
Oh, yeah.
if I
Keep
could
going.
introduce one book that I found was really eye-opening, it's called 30 Years Among the Dead by Dr. Carl Wickland. Um, it's a 200 yen ebook, and 200 yen, sorry, $2 as an ebook. It's a $2 on the internet, and his story is very interesting. He was a psychiatrist and his wife was a medium, and he used to exercise patients, and that entity would then, his wife as a medium would talk to that entity, and she say, why are you attacking this poor woman here? She can't sleep, she's got headaches, you're driving her mad. And then the entity would explain, his background, and that was just so enlightening. That was just such a great book.
Wow, I love that story. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing everything you have today. Like just so much knowledge and so many books you've read, and this 30 years among the dead. That sounds like I'm gonna check that out definitely. There's so many
It
books
sounds
in here.
creepy, but it is actually a kind of scientific experiment, rather like Tompkins and Bird's Secret Life of the Plants. It's one of the first books I started reading right in the beginning when I was reading Jane Roberts. Secret Life of the Plants talks about how plants communicate to each other. And this people, Tompkins and Bird, I think they set up experiments to prove that plants, even over long distances between cities, they can talk to each other. and they proved it with all sorts of experiments, and this blew me away, when I had no idea what spirituality was. This just shows that the whole world is connected. We're all part of one perfect internet that already existed before Google came along. It's just so
Yeah, yeah.
exciting. It just keeps going. I love it.
Yeah,
Gives me all this
absolutely.
energy.
Right. And I
Yeah,
think a book that's coming to mind for me is Michael Newton, Journey Between Lives, I think it is. Journey Between Souls, maybe. And he talks about, are you familiar with that book at all? About
no, I'm
how
not.
he was a hypnotherapist, and he would take his patients through past life regressions,
Yeah,
and they would talk about this time in between lives where it was almost it sounded so funny. It's almost like this DMV line where they're waiting in line, they have a number, and they get up to the counter, and the person's like, well, what kind of life do you want? They're like, well, I want to break my leg, I want to get in a car accident, I want to get this and that. And then they would punch their thing and they would get reincarnated. And it was just kind of funny. But all of a sudden there's like up to like 2,000 people were recounting this kind of similar, maybe not
yeah,
exactly, but similar experience on the other
yeah,
side. And it's just so
yeah.
I love this stuff. It's so interesting.
It's like Brian Weiss, Many Lives, Many Masters, or his other one, Same Soul, Many Bodies. He's got lots of books out. Same stories, yes. Two people meet in an airport, and they're just sitting chatting, but they've been married in a previous life, and they get to talk, and they marry again, Unbelievable. It's just,
Yeah, so
it's
wonderful.
yeah, it's I'd like to do this to get paid to do it. This would be the greatest thing, is actually to make a living doing this full time. To me, it's just an interest. I'm a university lecturer. I don't talk about these things at school at all. But, if I could help people and also make a living at it, that would be the ultimate goal for me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that. And I'm so glad there's people in universities like you that are really, really open to the energy, the universe, God, spirituality. So thank you so much. And how can people get a hold of you? Is there a website? Is there social media that they can get a hold of
No.
you? Not, nope. Okay, just the books.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
No, I have a site. My name is chris-earnshaw.com. Um, Then I'm on Twitter as author Earnshaw, and I've just started Instagram as author Earnshaw, and I have podcasts about Freemasonry called Freemasonry in 7 minutes or less. So it's just short bits about Freemasonry, like introductions. Mm, I'm actually quite visible on Google, I think. Yes. But if you put spiritual Freemasonry on the internet, YouTube, I've got a very, no, I wouldn't say, it's quite deep dive into Freemasonry and spirituality. It's called Spiritual Freemasonry on YouTube. I have about 65 videos there in giving, background to Freemasonry.
Oh, that's so wonderful. So everybody listening, you got to go check out Chris's stuff and just go deeper into this because it's amazing. And I just want to say thank you for being on the show. Thank you for all the value, all the interesting stories, everything we talked about today. It's just been a wonderful experience. So
Well,
thank you.
thank you, Thomas, for making this possible. I really appreciate the
Yeah.
opportunity.
Absolutely. And for everybody listening, I hope you're inspired to write your own book about exorcism or spirituality or Taoism. And yeah, that's the show. And we'll talk to you on the next one. There's an infinite amount of books floating out there in the ether, and all you have to do is tap into your highest self and write it. What if you could go out in the wilderness or international trek and experience firsthand shamanic healing, mental emotional release, and write your first draft? Writing a book isn't about the book. It's about the integration healing that book facilitates, isn't it? Because when the book heals the author, the book heals the reader. And that's an amazing thing. If you've been procrastinating writing your book for years now, you can hear that book screaming for its life every night. Join me for a backcountry breakthrough. You'll experience guided trekking, daily energy sessions, mental emotional release, and writing sessions that guarantee your rough draft by the time you get back to the trailhead. Join me for a backcountry breakthrough. Go to mountainmindtricks/backcountry-breakthrough. So go to mountainmindtricks.com/backcountry-breakthroughs. Writing a book isn't about the actual book, because there's going to be those obstacles that try and derail you from the actual writing. The key is persevering through the pain of writing every day. The book begins to highlight your emotional deep core wounds in a way that makes you want to quit writing, right? But if you stay on the course, the old beliefs, the old identity of yourself, the negative ways of thinking begin to fall away, and suddenly a new way of being starts to emerge. This is when the book begins to come alive and write itself, because in this moment, you aren't writing the book is writing itself as you have this internal transformation. This is the essence of healing through writing. Is your book screaming from the back of your mind? I know mine was. What would happen if your healing journey stopped here? You never got over that final hump. Your regret, remorse from not writing your book was the source of mind, body, future disease. I mean, what would you tell your clients if you couldn't work anymore? Go be healed somewhere else? I mean, what would happen if your business failed because you hold yourself back from your highest self? What would it be like if you regretted the book you never wrote, and your last thoughts on your deathbed was, I wish I would have written that book? See, all these things are tragic, but it's possible for you to reach your big dream and be a #1 best-selling author. When the book heals the author, the book heals the reader. And this is a powerful concept because when books heal the reader, they sell and they go #1 bestseller. And so I'm starting this movement of healing through writing and using the breakthrough session to release the root cause of writer's block, that procrastination, that loss of motivation when you started writing your book, or you had the idea and you never started. There's one-on-one coaching calls, weekly homework and accountability. After a comprehensive health assessment, we build habits and systems and goals to keep you on track. There's MP3 guided meditations, one-on-one hypnosis. And then I really teach you how to get published, how to self-publish, or publish with my company, Mountain Mind Tricks Publishing. Then you leverage your book on podcasts, talk shows, speaking engagements, and you manifest that prosperity and passive income you're really looking for in your business. So I want you to check out breakthroughwritersblock.com and join the Healing Through Writing movement. It'll be the best thing you've ever done in your life, because writing a book will completely change everything. So go to breakthroughwritersblock.com. Again, that's breakthroughwritersblock.com. Are you a new author that's trying to wade through self-publishing of what category should I pick, find the right designer, get an editor? What about the formatting? What's the dimensions that the actual spine of the book have to be? Is it gloss or white paper? There's so many different things that goes on in publishing. And that's why I'm dedicated to helping indie authors that have gone through this healing journey through writing their own book. Publish that piece of art, publish that amazing work that could help heal others. And here's the thing, is when a book heals the author, the book heals the reader. And this is so huge. I know I say this all the time, but it's so important. And I want to help the world make a huge impact by spreading more books that heal the reader. So if this sounds like you, I want you to go to mountainmindtricks.com/publishing. Again, that's mountainmindtricks.com/publishing. And if you're wading through, should I publish on Amazon? What about Ingram Spark? How do I get my book into bookstores? What should I do to even launch a book? How do I get on podcasts? There's so many things that go into publishing. And again, that's why I'm here for you. I want to publish your book. So if this sounds like you, go to mountainmindtricks.com/publishing. Again, mountainmindtricks.com/publishing.